Great.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm Molly Tankersley, Science Communicator for the Alaska Coastal Rainforest Center. Thanks for joining our webinar on the Juno Climate Report today. You'll notice that you've been muted and your video has been turned off. We'll keep the settings like this until the end when we open up for questions. We are recording today and the video and presentation slides will be available on the ACRC website afterwards. And if you have any questions or issues, you can shoot me a message in the chat. And with that, I will hand it over to Jim Powell to get us started.
Thanks, Molly. Good morning. My name's Jim Powell. I'm an assistant research professor at UAS. I do research. I'm an interdisciplinary researcher, so I do social science as well as natural sciences. And first out of the blocks, I want to thank Molly Tankersley for helping today and graphic design of the report itself. So she'll be helping running the meeting, which means that we're going to, if we could, hold the meeting, the questions at the end, and she'll be navigating the chat. So that's where you'll put your questions in, if you will. Other thanks, big thanks to all the authors, 22 other authors. It was a large lift, and I'm glad it's done. And hopefully it'll add to the science and data from which we can make better decisions in Juneau about climate change, because I think it's really important. So I want to thank all the authors. And let's see. So as Molly said, the meeting is being recorded, and that means that it'll be available on the ACRC website, which is at UAS, the Alaska Coastal Rainforest Center. So you can view it after that. So let me think. Before I turn it over to Molly for a few other kind of administrative things, just the organization of today's presentation. I'm going to do a really quick introduction and the key messages. As you see on the board here, this is how we've structured it, and the 4 other authors that have agreed to help today with talking about their different sections, because I definitely can't go deep at all in those. So it's really good to have Aaron, Sonia, Katie, Margot's part of the organization, the Renewable Juno. Andy was the author of that section, but she agreed to help. She certainly is a mover and shaker here in town as far as NGOs. So thanks to you folks for being here today. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh yeah, I should, this is the commercial part or whatever. The funders, thank again to CBJ for providing some funding, and also UAF for funding. That's where some of the money came from, but largely it was a volunteer effort. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of the report itself, and then we'll go right into the different sections. Molly, did I miss anything, or should I turn up the volume on anything?
That's great, Jim. Go ahead and get started. Thanks.
Okay. Let's see. Here we go. In the front of the airport, in front of the report itself, what we really try to do is, I'm having to admit, folks, sorry. Hopefully I got that.
Sorry. You can focus on the slides.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. There are 9 key messages. The reason what we really tried to do in the report was to hit 3 different audiences: decision makers, the general public, and scientists. So this part of the report hopefully will be of interest to the decision makers and folks that don't have time to look at the whole report. So we have 9 messages here. Oh, it's sensitive. So these are 9 messages. 7 of them go right to the, you might say, the ecological impacts. And then the last 2 are really what we're doing, what the city is doing as far as policy. That's number 9, or number 8. And number 9 is what the NGOs are doing. And they're doing a lot. There's 3 NGOs in town. You probably know that. Well, they're doing something too. They're really pushing the agenda forward in a lot of different ways. So that's why we have it in a report. So the report really has 3 or 4 different sections. The first section is the key messages. The next one is the impacts itself, the ecological impacts, and then the policy. And then we have recommendations at the end. And so it's a lot different than the 2007 report. So that's how it's organized. So I put this in the report because I want people to know that this didn't just happen. It was a series of events that led to this report. In 2006, 2007, the first report came out, and there were a series of things that the city did to lead to this report. There's resolutions, there are strategies, energy strategies, greenhouse gas emissions inventories. There were a lot of things that happened to really build to where we are. But I have to say, in 2007, it was a almost unique report in the sense that it was one of the few local governments, one of the local communities that put together a climate change report. So that's in there also. But so now what I'd like to do is turn over to Aaron. I think you're leading off with this, and go right into some of the sections of the report. So Aaron, could you take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. My name is Aaron Jacobs. I'm the Senior Service Hydrologist and a Meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Juneau here. And I want to acknowledge my colleague here who was the author of this section, which is Rick Toman with ACAP up there in UAF. But this portion of the report pretty much went over, and pretty much it was just showing that our temperatures and precipitation in the period of record that we have at the Juneau airport or in CBJ has been rising. And so heavy rain most often, happens in the fall from August to October, but, we can also see it in November, December, which are usually accompanied with high winds and from these large Pacific storms. And over this 96-year period record we've seen an increase in precipitation, an annual precipitation of almost 20 inches. There, as you can see in the graph on the right, there is some short-term variability within this period. So there are certain periods where it's been fairly wetter than normal and then fairly drier than normal. So this year-to-year or decade-to-decade variability will continue, even though we are seeing a gradual increase in precipitation. Now, temperatures in the graph to the bottom left, again, we're seeing that generally are rising and increasing temperatures. But what we're actually seeing is that in the winters and summer times are much more significant than the warming in the spring or autumn time. But annual temperature has been slowing, progressively getting warmer throughout this period, and it's really the absence of actually extreme cold weather. We really haven't seen much extreme cold years in the recent decades, rather than the increased average we've seen in temperatures in the warmest years. Next slide. And with these warming temperatures, we are actually seeing less snowfall. Juneau kind of hovers around that freezing temperature. So any small variations in temperature will really have a great, large effect on actual snowfall that the region sees. And the graph on the right kind of shows the annual decrease from 1940s to 2020 of the actual decrease at the International Airport of our snow depth. And less snow will have an impact on our ecosystems, from our stream flows in summertime when our dry season is, to water temperature. The stream flows get low enough, the water temperature goes up, and it's not really susceptible for spawning salmon. And then also recreational and glaciers, forest health. So there's a lot of impacts that less snowfall will do. At higher elevations, rarely sees above freezing temperatures, but so that could see increase in snowpack up there with these warmer systems that come in, holds more water. But with this change in snowfall patterns, it will affect our avalanche activity. From the lower snowpack could reduce the amount of avalanches. But if we see more of these rain on snow events, which I'll talk to here in the next slide from atmospheric rivers, we could actually see an increase in larger avalanches just because of that variability in the snowpack at those elevations. Next slide. And so this is where my work really comes into with the National Weather Service. And this is doing research within atmospheric rivers. And atmospheric rivers is the most intense prolonged precipitation events that Juneau typically sees. And as the climate becomes warmer and wetter, there's going to be an increase in these extreme precipitation events. And atmospheric rivers contribute majority of our extreme weather events. The map on the right shows the average contribution of atmospheric rivers to our extreme precipitation events. And you would see that over 80% of these atmospheric events produce extreme precipitation. And more precipitation, more atmospheric rivers gives more extreme precipitation events. And from these extreme precipitation events, we've seen fatalities, property damage due to these atmospheric rivers, like we've seen in 2019 in Douglas, and then down in around the whole borough in 2020 in December 1 and 2. And so with these heavy precipitation events, we are seeing that they are linked to landslide activity. And we'll have Sonia talk about the landslides that we see in the Juneau borough. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. So we can just go to the, here we go. So as Aaron was just saying, thank you. By the way, my name is Sonia Nagorski. I am a geology professor at UAS. And so regarding landslides, the landslides can be caused by a variety of triggers, but in our region, rainfall is the #1 trigger. I mean, they can also be activated by earthquakes or by undercutting of slopes from road work or stream erosion. But in our region, heavy precipitation is the most common trigger. And so these kinds of triggers that are rainfall related are going to be intensified in places where, or in events when the soil is already saturated from prior rainfall, can even be gentle rain. And then on top of that, if you get a high precipitation event like these atmospheric rivers that can dump 3 to 6 inches of rain per day, that's enough to essentially, so much water gets into the soil that it increases the pore water pressure of the soil particles. Essentially, the soil particles start to swim in that amount of water, and so then the slope or that soil layer that is capping the slope becomes mobilized as a fluid, as you can see in this photo here, crossing Glacier Highway near the Aware Shelter, or up by in the Salmon Creek watershed. And so with these increasing, so landslides are normal in our area. We have steep slopes. We naturally have a lot of rain. We've got weathered soils. However, an increase in the rainfall intensity, especially in terms of atmospheric rivers. We've seen this already in Haines, in Sitka, and in Juneau, that during some of these events, especially in the fall or early winter, can overwhelm the soils and mobilize the slopes. And so, and not all areas are equally susceptible. There, especially steep slopes, of course, and then, because after all, it's gravity that's pulling the material down slope, and it is activated by water that can just disturb that delicate balance that's holding the material clinging to the slope against gravity. And so, as I say, though, it can also be disturbed by road building, logging, or development. So road building or even trail building, house building, anything, if something's coming to the base of the slope and excavating that out, then that's disturbing that stable angle of the material. So one thing that we need to be careful of is where and how we disturb that natural balance of the slope with development or redevelopment, and taking down trees and so forth that can add stability to the slope. Some areas in Juneau are going to be that they're just due to bad luck, they're sitting there, they're not disturbing the slope, but they're at the mercy of potential landslides because they're at the base of a steep slope. And other areas maybe aggravate the landslide chance by undercutting the slope or reroute or changing the water routing and so forth. So there's some things that people can do to minimize the risk, and certainly identifying the risk is the first step, and recognizing that not all houses are equally susceptible, and identifying which are the most susceptible to being impacted by a landslide, as was done in the study that came out last year that showed that about half of the houses in downtown Juneau are in a high landslide or avalanche risk zone. In summary, as the warming continues and we get more of these extreme precipitation events like Aaron was just talking about, then this is going to lead to more and more landslides. We've seen an increase in the number of days per year where we get more than half an inch of rain per year. So it's not just the total amount of rainfall per year, but it's the distribution of when it's happening and that intensity, and also the preceding conditions leading up to that storm. Okay, next slide, please, Jim. And then, so switching gears a little bit here, I'm going to briefly go over the sea level rise section that Aaron Hood wrote, who can't join this webinar today. So essentially, so we all know that sea level is rising due to the thermal expansion of water and the addition of fresh water of glacier melt into the world's oceans. But there's another issue happening in Juneau, which is that we're having isostatic rebound. So as glaciers, when glaciers form and grow and they become, kilometers thick, then they are heavy enough that they actually subside the crust below. The crust kind of smushes into the softer asthenosphere below. And then when that ice melts away, then it unloads that the crust, and then the asthenosphere flows back and then lifts the crust back up a little bit. And so there's sort of a delayed effect, because after all, we're talking about rock that's being pressed down and then bouncing back up. And so due to the intense glaciation that this area has undergone for the last few tens of thousands of years, and now the rapid glacial retreat, we have isostatic rebound. And so the land surface is rising, and it is, as of now, it is rising faster. It's outpacing sea level rise. So we keep, so even though sea level is rising, Juneau is rising, the land is actually rising even faster up. So we see the growth of, tidal areas. Now, can Juneau's rise keep outpacing sea level? So this really depends on what happens this century in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and the amount of warming, and therefore the amount of sea level rise. And this graph on the bottom left shows, I guess I can't use my cursor, but you can see where we are at the end of the black line of where we are. And then the predicted Juneau land surface uplift is that gray area that is capped by the dashed line. And then you can see that the colored projections, that really depends on different greenhouse path gasways. If we continue on extremely high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, then by the end of this century, we could have an over 2.5 meter rise in sea level, about 8 feet. And that will be much higher than Juneau's isostatic rebound. So we would expect inundation by water. However, if we can keep it at sort of an intermediate to intermediate high level, the projections show that we will be kind of on par. We'll have the same relative sea level at in the year 2100 as we do now. So we would expect our roads and bridges, our coasts to look the same. If we can really rein in greenhouse gas emissions, then we would expect Juneau to keep rising faster than sea level is rising. Okay, so thank you. And I can take questions at the end.
Thanks, Sonia.
Good morning. My name is Jason Amundsen. I'm an associate professor of geophysics at UAS and a glacier researcher, glaciologist. For this section of the report, we focused a bit more locally and just really looked at what is happening at Mendenhall Glacier. And this is actually based on work that Aaron Hood and I had done also with Mike Heckers a few years back. Just trying to understand how the glacier is going to change in the future. We were working with some architects that have been helping to, redesign the visitor center, and they're trying to figure out how many people are going to come to the visitor center in the future, because that affects how they design it. Glaciers are, at their most basic, they're a product of climate change, and they're indicators of climate change. Aaron Jacobs talked earlier about how the precipitation in Juneau is changing, and also how the temperature is changing. And this is one of the major unknowns in terms of modeling how glaciers are going to change, is knowing what the climate is going to do. And it's particularly challenging at kind of higher elevation places where we don't have a lot of weather data. The other challenge is not knowing the bedrock topography very well. We have a little bit of information from Mendenhall, but we don't have a really nice bed map that would make it easier for us to model how the glacier is going to change. And so what we did was something fairly simple. We just looked at what are the observed rates of thinning over now the last 20 years or so. We related those thinning rates to what the climate is doing, especially the summer air temperature seems to be what drives a lot of change. Although, as Aaron talked about earlier, there may be more snow occurring at high elevations in the winter. So that's, I guess, just a little caveat there, but really focusing on how the thinning rates relate to air temperature, and then just taking a map of the glacier, a digital elevation model or a topographic map, and just thinning it at a certain rate, and looking at how much ice is left. And then from that, we're creating new surface elevation maps, which we can then look at sort of through, like in Google Earth, you can do this sort of view where you can look at the surrounding topography. And so we did that to try to get a sense of what the glacier would look like from the visitor center, which is what you see here. Because there's all this uncertainty in what the thinning rates are going to be and how that's related to climate, we did several different scenarios with, lower thinning rates than what we've been observing and higher thinning rates. What you see here in the lower right is the mid-range thinning scenario. So probably what we would call our best guess, what we think the glacier is going to look like in about 20 years from now. The other part of the report, which isn't shown on this slide, is that we've also, of course, been working on the outburst floods that come from Mendenhall Glacier and trying to understand how those are changing with time. And although we've learned a lot over the last 10 years, there's still a lot we don't know about those outburst floods. There's a lot of year-to-year variability. What we do know is that there's competing factors that are going to determine how those floods change over time. As the glacier thins, that would tend to make the floods become smaller, just because the ice dam that's holding back the water is becoming smaller, so you can't hold as much water. At the same time, though, there's also floating ice, remnant ice that's sitting in that basin, and as that's wasting away, that increases the storage capacity of that basin, which could make the floods become bigger. So there's this trade-off between processes that are affecting the size of the outburst floods. So we expect them to continue for the next, I don't know, maybe a couple of decades, but exactly how they're going to change over time is still a pretty big question mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for joining us today too. Okay, now going to Katie.
Thank you, Jim. So my name is Katie Kester, and I'm the Engineering and Public Works Director for CBJ. And unlike this distinguished panel, I am not an expert in climate change or climate issues, but my department does work a lot with the Assembly's sustainability goals. And so we work under the policy guidance of the Juno Commission on Sustainability and the Assembly Public Works and Facilities Committee. I'm trying to implement some of the JRES recommendations. And of course, there's lots of impacts to our city and borough infrastructure with the changes in rainfall and a lot of the things that the previous speakers have chatted about. So there's one small, not so small, but there's one piece that I'd like to highlight that you probably don't think about, because when you flush the toilet, it disappears, and we treat it and you don't have to think about it. But increased precipitation has a really dramatic effect on our ability to treat wastewater. And this is because, throughout time, we haven't really done a great job as a community of preventing storm drains and surface drains from going into the sewer treatment system. Wasn't a big issue, 30 years ago, because we had a lot of treatment capacity. But now that our plant is over 50 years old, that increase in rainwater messes up with the bugs. So what happens, and you can see in this chart here, the December 2020 flood event where Sonia talked about the landslides, we had this massive spike in rainfall that entered into our system. And what happens then is our system gets overwhelmed, and we can't give the bugs enough time to do the job that they need before we have to turn them over and let new water into the system. It also disrupts the life cycle of those bugs, and we end up having, not our effluent that gets sent into the environment is not ideal, right? So we have violations because of that. So that's a big push for CBJ right now, is in getting a lot of these stormwater connections, roof drain connections, not going into the system. So just a little kind of real world piece I thought we'd highlight. Next slide. So as we look at adapting to climate change and increased precipitation, there are things that CBJ is working on. I think Sonia had a picture of the Aware shelter. I know Aware on Monday was awarded funding for a retaining wall to work on that. So we have to look at things like retaining walls, look at the sizing of our culverts. Right now, our culverts are designed for 25-year storm cycles, and that's part of, that is part of code that adopts, that's backed by science, that adopts these guidelines that we require not only our infrastructure, but also when we have developers develop infrastructure, what we require of them. And so reports like these can help us as we base our best management practices and our standards. Sonia also talked a little bit about the hazard mapping that was done in 2021 for landslide and avalanche assessments. Those maps are online, and it's controversial because Alaskans don't like to be told what to do with their property, and identifying property as hazardous could have impacts on property development. So I just wanted to let this group know that the Land, Housing, and Economic Development Committee will be reviewing those maps upcoming here on August 8th, and then we'll go through the assembly process. So if you're interested in that topic, please tune in. I think I mentioned earlier that something that my department does is work on implementing some of the recommendations. And so just wanted to briefly talk through some of the programs that we're working on, encouraging weatherization. JCOS has been really a forefront in advocating for deferred maintenance projects for CBJ, which means more energy efficient HVAC systems, heating and cooling systems, more energy efficient insulation roofs. These are basic things, but they have a really big impact on our energy usage. We also, think Professor Powell mentioned that you can't fix what you can't measure. And so we've contracted with Dynamex to measure our community greenhouse gas emissions. That initial measurement was taken when JRES was written. And so really developing a robust tool where we can measure that is something that we have been working on. And of course, we've also been working on internally on really good metrics for our buildings and our vehicles and our systems, so that again, we can look at reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and reducing our, a lot of times it also means reducing our costs. So a lot of bang for your buck there. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Margot, go ahead. Margot, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, or I can't anyway.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Very
Ah,
good.
good. I didn't have it turned up high enough, sorry. My name is Margot Waring. I'm the president of the board of Renewable Juno, and I sit on the board of Alaska Heat Smart. I think we cannot underestimate the impact of both group and individual actions in terms of changing policies, changing direction, and getting the public to understand how they can be participants in processes of mitigation and understanding climate change and its impacts. Renewable Juno first started its work as an advocate for the Juno, the JRES, the document that gives us our goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2045. We are one of a number of advocacy organizations, and I want to just give a little shout out to them. JCOS, of course, is within the city government. There's also Interfaith Power and Light, 350 Juno, the JIVA, the Juneau Electric Vehicle Association, and Alaska Heat Smart, all working on different but interconnected aspects of advocacy and work regarding climate change and renewable energy. And just a quick mention that 350 Juno and other groups are going to be at a fair at the Whale on July 23rd from 3 to 5. Let me just say a few words about the work of 501c3s like Renewable Juno. We have an education and advocacy role. We advocate at different levels of government. We work with other community organizations. For instance, we've held workshops and we've been at home fairs, and we were instrumental in the electric bus that Capital Transit now has. We donate books to the elementary school libraries. We do presentations. We've done a lot of work, for instance, on the dock electrification and its implications for the community, and have looked forward to working with the Green Corridors program. One of our efforts at Renewable Juno was to partner with other groups and establish Alaska Heat Smart as an arm that could better address ways to increase the adoption of air source heat pumps for home heating purposes. One of the strategies that can really have a major impact on the community's reduction of greenhouse gases. And we've been very successful at that. And we have, Alaska Heat Smart has received several awards from federal government agencies, which will increase our impact this coming year and following years. But in the meantime, the first of that work was Renewable Juno's, and it was called the Juno Carbon Offset Fund, where we asked people to understand their own carbon footprints. We have a calculator on our website, and to offset that by reducing carbon emissions that are verifiable in the community. And in this case, those verifiable reductions were the installation of air source heat pumps in the homes of lower income families, removing them from fossil fuel heating systems, increasing their annual income by the savings that they accrue by that change, and thereby benefiting the economy of the community as a whole. The program has been successful at identifying business partners who contribute to us regularly and individuals who contribute to us regularly, most frequently for their own travel, which is now picking up again, and so are our revenues. But we have, through this program, installed over 30 air source heat pumps in the homes of lower income families in our community. We see this also as a part of what's called environmental justice, climate justice, that the benefits of renewable energy need to be distributed throughout different sectors of the community. Our carbon offset program is now in the process of receiving international certification, which we hope will be a way to attract bigger businesses. We have been one of the tourism best management practices recommendations, and we hope with international certification that more businesses will offset their carbon by joining the Juno Carbon Offset Fund program. We have a website, renewablejuno.org, and all the other groups in Juneau that working on different aspects of these issues also have websites. I encourage you to explore them, a great deal to learn there, and to find other ways in which the general public can participate in the reduction of greenhouse gases, contribute to the community's goal of 80% by 2045, and do our part for a sounder future. Thank you, Jim, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Margot. I think it's been a wonderful presentations. We went from the science to the city to the citizens. And thanks for doing such a good job in such a short period of time. So I'd like to talk a little about the recommendations at the end of the report, and just to very briefly go over these. There are three areas that we highlighted: energy, cruise ships, and also food security on the next slide. And the reason why we did this is because, and there are suggestions to the CBJ. And the reason why we did those was, it was something that we think CBJ has authority and control over, because there's a lot of things that we don't have control over in Juneau, but these things that they're engaged in already, or they might have a way to influence. So that's why we listed these and picked these. And as Katie said, we can't manage unless we've got some numbers, some matrix. So I think it's important, that's what we're working on at JCOS, or the Juneau Commission on Sustainability, is on indicators. And we hope to make some progress on that. Come up with indicators that tell us how we're doing, how much energy are we using from the different sectors in our community. That needs to be improved and added to. And then the energy strategy itself. I think CBJ did a great job on putting together that document itself. We need to follow through with those things, and that's what Katie was talking about, working on those. And I think there has been a great amount of progress, because now it's kind of, CBJ Public Works is talking about it and doing things about it, as she mentioned earlier. And then all the things that the nonprofits are doing. And so I think that's important. This might seem a little strange, but I put the cruise ship emissions in because I think they were big emitters as far as greenhouse gases. And it's a bit complex as far as finding out what those greenhouse gases are. And it's complex in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different players. Internationally, the International Maritime Organization now has standards down to state standards. So it's complex, but I think it should be monitored, and our movement on plugging in cruise ships should continue. So we recommend those. And those come out of the recommendations of the tourism working group. It's called the Industry Tourism Working Group, I think. So we're saying, yes, act on those recommendations. And then lastly, food security. We're in the boat of most parts, maybe even more so than other Alaskans, in that we have to import over 95% of our food. That's a big thing. So we thought that we would add this as far as our security, and climate change has something to do with that, because that's changing our our growing seasons and plants and everything else. So we have some recommendations here, and I'm not going to go into all those, but basically there needs to be a lot more attention on that, what we can do locally. And there are things happening, small movements forward, but I think this was important to include. And it's in the report too on food security. So I think rather than going any further, I'd like to turn it over to, we have over 40 people in the that have joined us today, and maybe go to questions and answers. Molly, so if you have questions, please put those in the chat, and we'll start to try to field those questions with our experts. Let's try to do that.
You now have the ability to unmute yourself as well. So if you'd like to raise your hand and ask a question over audio, you're free to do that as well.
We'll wait a couple seconds here. Listen.
My name is Aaron Marsh. I have a question for Aaron Jacobs, if I may.
Fire
Yeah,
away.
go for it, Aaron.
Aaron, you had mentioned atmospheric rivers as they are a source of a lot of the large storms that we see in Juneau. Is that are we seeing atmospheric rivers more what we could say a direct hit to Juneau, or is that kind of always been that our large storms are atmospheric rivers?
Most of the ones that produce heavy precipitation are associated with atmospheric rivers. We can have these other types of storms, which are holds a lot of moisture, but not necessarily kind of goes into the fine line or the definition of what an atmospheric river is. So it can still like a very strong weather front or a low pressure system could still produce heavy precipitation and strong winds and not necessarily be associated with like an atmospheric river. We're called extratropical cyclones. But what we've seen in the June in the last, probably my time here, I've been here for 20 years, we've seen a lot more impactful high precipitation events in atmospheric rivers, and the climate studies that have been done just show that there are going to be more atmospheric rivers that we're seeing in time, and then also the strength of those atmospheric rivers are going to be increasing too because of the amount of moisture that the atmosphere can now hold. So I think we have been seeing more of these impactful events more than we have seen in the more recent past.
Okay, so I guess kind of extending that question then, are these atmospheric river events being incorporated into models that can be used to predict, say, return periods for large storms?
Yeah, that's actually what we're working on right now. I'm linking atmospheric river events to precipitation return intervals. So we're seeing that what type of atmospheric river strength-wise and what type of rainfall intensities we're seeing. So then we're kind of coming up with like a atmospheric river scales, because not every single atmospheric river is the same. You can have a weak one to a strong one, then also the duration of that event itself. So we are looking into that right now, of exactly seeing what type of return periods precipitation-wise are we seeing with these types of atmospheric river events. And then when our forecasters can look at precipitation that is being forecasted from our models, we can look at those return periods and then start messaging what type of impacts we could see based upon those fields.
Cool, thank you. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
We have a chat, and it reads, can Juneau achieve 80% carbon free with tourism? Well, I think that should be a goal. That's one of our goals for a community. And how do we define that? While they're in harbor, I would think, and then also the impacts that they have, the buses and other aspects. They should be part of the mix, I think. That would be my response.
May I add to that, Jim?
Sure, go ahead.
I think Jim is right on target there, that there are ways to decrease the emissions of cruise ships through dock electrification, and the associated transportation of visitors to whatever venues they want in the community can also be electrified. We have one bus that is electrified and has been a way for the community to learn about how to handle that mode of transport. I think that CBJ can do a number of things to encourage the adoption of electric buses and discourage the use of particularly the oldest of the diesel engines in buses. And we need to look to the Mendenhall Glacier Visitor Center as a nub to which 1 million people go every year, and how they can incentivize the use of electric buses and can also become an education center to bring awareness to people about just the kind of issues that we've all been learning about today.
There are two other questions that have come into the chat. Sally Schlichting, Aaron, or maybe Sonia.
I can take that. So first, to the comment about the precipitation amount that Sonia was talking about. That's not the soils. It's actually a half inch of precipitation in a day. So we're actually seeing more days of greater than a half inch of precipitation, and that's indicative of seeing more intense, heavy precipitation events than what we've had seen in the past. Now, going back to the question about how a warming environment's changing the jet stream, and that is causing the jet stream to be more unstable. So you get more big swings from a warm and wet to a cold and dry pattern. And with those big swings, we are seeing the frequency of atmospheric rivers, or the strength of them, can increase just because of the fluidness of the atmosphere and seeing that unstableness in that jet stream, which usually is a driving factor of how that moisture from the tropics gets moved into poleward towards the Gulf of Alaska into the Juneau area. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks, Aaron. I think Mark Sabatini, is that a question? Now considering the primary factor, I think it is. And it's
Thanks,
to
Jim.
Katie.
I'd be happy to take that. So the violations due to accepting cruise ship waste in 2017 were only at the JD plant. So that was specific just to one plant. We have 3 wastewater treatment plants. Mendenhall in the valley treats the majority of our waste. And so that's kind of our biggest player. We have entered into an agreement with the cruise ship companies to make them interruptible customers, which means we will never accept their waste if we think that it will damage our bugs and damage our system. The second, there's kind of 3 tiers to the violations that we've experienced in the past and that we are working on correcting. And the second one that Mark mentions in its chat is high strength waste. And that's absolutely still an issue. You know, organics going down the drain, they don't belong down the drain. And again, they affect the bugs because the bugs have to, you know, really eat at those a lot. And so we are working with some of the grocery stores in town, the restaurants in town, on getting those that waste stream out of the drain. We're also working with JCOS and Juno compost on some type of municipal composting. So that's an exciting, some exciting research that we are doing, but high strength waste is a factor, and stormwater absolutely is a factor too. So stormwater, we see it really markedly when we have these large rain events, because all that stormwater enters into our system, but the stormwater is entering into our system throughout the year, and we need to get that water out of the system in order for our plant to be able to handle the volume of waste and not to have to invest in a new plant. So again, that starts with public education, which is part of it. And there is, you know, code, of course, that doesn't allow you to connect to stormwater, but people don't even know often that they're connected to the stormwater drain. So I wouldn't say that climate change has shifted as the primary factor, but those two factors are really high. I have my engineer in charge of this like texting me madly right now. So I'll chime in if she says, if I got anything wrong there.
Great. Brenda Taylor has a question. It's really about it's kind of like, it's, I guess, weather effects, and also what about the second crossing? Keeping trees up as buffers. I don't know how to answer that. Katie, you have any thoughts, or your engineer?
Let's see. I'm not quite I'm not sure about the second crossing question, but of course that is a project that my department is collaborating with ADOT on. No, I think that looking at second crossing and environmental concerns, that's absolutely part of the planning and environmental linkages study that we're working on right now. Any project will also require a full NEPA assessment, which is the environmental impact of that. You know, there are positive impacts to reducing the transportation distance that we have to travel. And so, you know, making it a 3-minute drive from, you know, North Douglas to the valley instead of a 20-minute drive, creating a transportation loop that makes it more efficient to use electric vehicles. There are definitely some pros and cons as we look at that potential development. I hope I answered your question. I didn't get a chance to read it, so I'm just kind of ad-libbing there, but I'll go to the chat box.
I think that was a good one. I think that nowadays, as far as integrating climate change impacts into EISs and such, I think that it's almost a standard operating procedure, but there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, we have information, we have more information from the scientists locally now, but I would think that they would be incorporated somehow, and that would be interesting to see how they would incorporate that into the EIS for the second crossing, or that work for sure. I have another question from Bill Lady, and I don't know if you folks are familiar, but there's a green corridor, and Bill, I think that the green corridor, what you're referring to, is this work on a collaboration amongst different localities in a regional sense towards impacts from cruise ships. And I think that's the corridor that you were talking about. Bill, if you could, if you want to connect with us.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Yes, Alexandra Pierce, Juno CBJ tourism manager, is really the point person on this, because she was at physically or virtually the inaugural meeting about May 17th this year, when the Port of Seattle said, we really want to launch this thing because we're getting some direction from our board of directors here at the Port of Seattle that we want the green things. So it was announced, and now they're in the process of trying to figure out what they've done and how to proceed with it. You had said a few minutes ago that the tourism situation, energy in particular, is very complex. Well, it's very simple in the sense that we, as the citizens of and the community of Juneau, are collectively responsible with the other ports of Southeast Alaska and the ports of Seattle and Vancouver, BC, and the cruise ship industry, and all the businesses that depend upon that industry, for the consumption, the burning of an enormous amount of fossil fuel in order for the ships to get here and then for the shore excursions to proceed. Collectively responsible. And that's why the second part of my question, Jim, does your report adequately convey a sense of climate emergency? If this is a climate emergency, then what is our responsibility to prevent this enormous burning of fossil fuel for the benefit of the wonderful businesses and industry in Southeast Alaska?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. It's urgent, certainly, and I'll leave that up to the readers to determine whether the report has conveyed that urgency or not. What we try to do in the report is to lay out the science in different ways, and I'm sure we've probably missed some for sure, but I think that it does convey urgency. At the very beginning, I think some of the authors, even I think Tom, one of the authors that is at UAS, was trying to convey that it is one of the most important things that we focus on as a community, as a nation, internationally. So hopefully this report adds to the science and to start coming up with better metrics for all of us in town and what we do, not just the cruise ships, but as you say, it's a big impact, and that shouldn't be underestimated. And that's why I included some of that in the report. It probably
Thank you,
doesn't
Jim.
answer.
Let's stay connected with Alex and see what we can do.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's a whole new career for you extending this report
Yeah.
for green corridor purposes.
Well, I think one big, I mean, on that issue, as far as cruise ships, I mean, it's an advancement, and it was the recommendation of that committee to have a person at CBJ work on tourism issues. And I think that was a big forward leap to have somebody like that to work on this stuff full time. And I think that was an important step, and she is working on it. Stay tuned on that. And thanks for bringing that up. And before we adjourn, I wanted to make sure that I thank the Tlingit community too, Tlingit Haida community. The beginning of the report, as I mentioned on the radio the other day, that they too have a report that they put out, an adaptation plan by Tlingit Haida. At the beginning of this effort, we talked to them, Ray Paddock at Tlingit Haida. We asked, since they already had a report, should we integrate it into ours? And they said, no, just mention ours to make sure that people know about it. And that's a regional report. And they not only have the science, but they also have the local knowledge and traditional knowledge that they added to it. So we have something from Lori.
Jim, you've got one question above that from Carla as well.
Okay.
Jim, you can see all the experts are listening to me and chiming in. so thank you to my staff for keeping chiming in and filling in the detail.
There you go. So you can read some of the chats, everyone, the comments. Lori's the engineer and the staff. Okay. And I think we're about out of time, but we've just begun. So stay tuned. Please use the website. Molly, if we have comments or on the report, I know we don't have the funding or the bandwidth to maybe respond to all people's questions, but please, you'll see the list of the authors in the report. I think that they would welcome you contacting them with questions. So if you have questions about particulars in the report, please go there. And then also, as Gretchen Kaiser said, she's the head of the Juno Sustainability Commission, or Commission on Sustainability, and I'm a member of that. We will be moving forward on many of these things. Mainly, my task in the next year is to dust off the old indicators that we came up with in the 90s with Bill himself and others, to come up with indicators for sustainability for our community. And that's about climate change also. So if you have any questions, or actually, as Gretchen put in the chat, I'm going to put this in here. We're looking for some new members for the Juno Commission on Sustainability. So if you'd like to follow up with us, please apply to get on that commission. We could use some more people. So let me think if there's anything else. I'm going to put the last page here. These are all the authors and acknowledgements. Again, thanks to everybody today for your time and attending and your attention. That's what we need. We need to do it as a community as a whole. Molly, any ending comments?
That's it. Thank you, Jim. I put our ACRC contact email in the chat for anyone who would like to get in touch. We can put you in direct contact with any of the authors if you have further questions.
And thanks to the experts that spoke today and took on those different sections. I really appreciate that. Okay, have a great day. I think we'll sign off. Bye-bye.